No doubt you've heard clips or watched or in some part consumed the president's State of the Union address. And originally, we were going to break down ins and outs from the night, but it hit me as I had a little bit more time to digest everything. We need to dig deeper than just the best zingers and the best applause lines and all the times where the Democrats told us once again out loud by their action or inaction that they hate America and they hate Americans and want illegal immigrants in and want us out. Okay, we've got all that. None of that is a surprise. Also, if you weren't clued into the fact by now, President Donald Trump believes he's the best president in the world, and just ask him, he'll tell you. Now, we could also fact check the fact checkers and do nerdery things like that. But I think there was something more important that came out of the State of the Union, that amidst all the bragging, all the applauding, the good stuff too, okay, here's a great speech and here's a wonderful, emotional cheerleader, rah-rah. And there were real Americans that were honored. There were real people who made real difference that were honored, and that was good. But three things I think we're missing that I want to bring up. One, and I know why they didn't address it, but no addressing of bringing any Epstein crowd to justice. No real justice. We did hear a little bit of the Supreme Court made a terrible decision on bringing down the tariffs, and of course Mike Ring was on earlier talking about his take on that. And this is certainly an issue that's affecting our state of our entire union, and not in a good way. Although I suppose it was maybe a fool's hope to think we'd even get tough talk on justice in general. But still, I guess we're done with that. Second, no mention of how we're going to bring down our ever-growing, stratospherically massive debt. No tip as to, well, the next continuing resolution or the next spending bill is going to actually be less than what Biden spent in his administration or the COVID spending at the end of Trump 1.0. And the third thing that I found missing was any talk of working with Congress to codify any of these policies into actual law at all. Now think about this. You need to take stock. Other than spending bills and government shutdowns and more spending bills, what have the president and Congress done together? And this is not just a President Trump thing. This is going back several administrations. Probably the executive order dance really got going in earnest under Bush 43. But I really can't think of anything that they've done together of any meaningful substance. Trump 2.0 has been an executive order fest, with the majority of his actions and accomplishments coming via the aforementioned executive order. Now, to be sure, as I mentioned, the executive order is not unique to President Trump. He's using the powers that he's allowed to use constitutionally. And one could argue that, okay, maybe he's pushing the limits of that use. Some of the Supreme Court justices thought so. Conservatives are split on that. But my concern is that America overall is allowing too much executive power and not demanding enough from our Congress. And so I want to build this case. And to do that, let me set the scene this way. On February 18th, the White House announced that President Trump signed an executive order, surprise, surprise, using the Defense Production Act to protect domestic production of glyphosate-based herbicides. In other words, we're going to put glyphosate on steroids and framing it as a national security and food supply issue. Okay, and again, the administration used an emergency-style executive authority to keep this ag chemical supply chain moving, which seems to go smack in the face of MAHA, except even RFK Jr. came out in support of this. We're going to have more on this story in an upcoming episode. And of course, glyphosate itself, and this does matter, a lot of Americans hear that term glyphosate, that word, and immediately think cancer lawsuits and gut problems and all the MAHA alarm bells, and there's good reason for that. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as a probable carcinogen to humans all the way back in 2015. So this is nothing new. However, the EPA maintains that when used according to directions, there's no risks of human health and unlikely to be a carcinogen. Nevertheless, this is not a done deal. And the same is true with the issues that people, gluten-free, for example, many theorize and are finding connections to glyphosate and the gut dysfunction that makes it difficult for people to digest gluten, and that becomes gluten intolerance. A 2024 systematic review found these same things. Now, why do I go into all that? Here's why. Because this is not crazy talk, it's not settled science, but exactly why people expected more transparency, more debate, and less unilateral swagger from our government. Now, whether you think this was smart or reckless, the bigger issue is this: it's another policy move done from the Oval Office, not through Congress. And that pattern is the real story. And it was on display last night at the State of the Union. Because once you normalize, well, the president can just do it. You're not building a conservative governing framework. You're building a presidential super toolkit. And someday soon, that toolkit will be in the hands of people who think your values are the real public health threat. That's what I want to avoid. That's why I'm so concerned about this. Let's be honest, conservatives like results. I like results. We're tired of weak-kneed, limp-noodle Republican leadership that campaigns pretending to be Braveheart but governs like they're an intern at an insurance seminar. Trump is a world-class political marketer. He understands momentum. He understands attention. He understands that in modern politics, if you don't dominate the story dominates you. But here's the thing. Governing is different from marketing and branding. You can win the internet all week long and still lose the republic by Friday. Now, Trump keeps choosing the fastest lane: executive orders, emergency powers, unilateral deals, and pressure campaigns, instead of, albeit a slower, constitutional lane of debate, votes, and durable law. I believe that's a dangerous precedent. It's been reported recently that Trump relies on emergency powers at a pace that far outstrips recent presidents, noting that 30 of his 150 executive orders so far in Trump 2.0 come under some form of emergency authority. And this is a warning because this approach is being used to supplant Congress's role, especially on trade. That's not small, that's not structural. And the trade, we see this revealed there. The Constitution's Commerce Clause isn't vague. Congress does have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Even Trump-friendly Republicans have said this out loud. Colorado Rep. Jeff Hurd publicly said major trade decisions should rest on clear statutory authority, and that if tariffs are necessary, Congress should debate and vote on them. Right after he said that, Trump withdrew his endorsement of John Hurd. Surprise, surprise, and back to primary challenger. Fox News quoted Trump calling Hurd one of the legislators who, quote, let me and our country down. Let that sink in. Here's a Republican congressman who steps forward and said, maybe we should do this constitutionally, and he gets politically kneecapped. And why? Because he didn't toe the party line. That's not a healthy party dynamic. That is not a big tent. That is a loyalty test with a red hat on. If the only conservatives allowed in the room are the ones who are going to nod on cue, we don't have a party. We have a choreographed song and dance team. And this is exactly how bad precedents get set, not by a dramatic moment, but by 1,000 little moments where everyone says, yeah, but this is our guy doing it. Or yeah, this time it helps us. So now you layer on the tariffs. After the Supreme Court struck down the big chunk of Trump's tariffs and reaffirmed Congress's role, it was reported that Trump basically said he didn't need Congress and moved quickly to impose new tariffs under a different statute. And the wording was blunt in the reports. Congressional Republicans briefly got relief, but Trump then made it clear he had no intention of working with Congress and would go it alone. And that's the whole argument right there. This is not about whether tariffs are good or bad. That's a different discussion. It's about whether we still believe in separation of powers, even when it's inconvenient, even when it might slow us down. Because we're talking about buying time for America. And we're not buying time for America if we continue to concentrate more and more power into the executive branch, looking the other way, while everything that gets done is by edict and decree and not by a legislative debate and vote. Because if we don't, well, then you can spare me the speeches later on when Democrats do the same thing, only faster and meaner, and with the media machine cheering them on. You don't get to build the throne and then act surprised when the other party sits in it. And yeah, that concern is not hypothetical. Former Obama official Susan Rice recently warned that when Democrats are back in power, it won't be forgive and forget, especially for Trump-aligned institutions. Reports quote Ms. Rice talking about entities that take a knee to Trump being held accountable. That's a quote. Now, you can call that political talk. You can call it bragging. That's fine. Don't miss the point. They are telling you how they plan to govern. They're not afraid to sit down and let us know and know in certain terms that they'd rather have every illegal alien in America and not us. So why would we not believe them on this? Why are we handing them a bigger executive playbook? Why are we acting like emergency powers are a toy that we get to use, but they won't? The Brennan Center, they do emergency powers research. They lay out how many authorities have become available once a president declares a national emergency. And the National Emergencies Act itself shows how complicated and politically hard it is for Congress to unwind that once the machinery is moving. So in other words, once power shifts, it rarely shifts back, and especially not politely. Now, I want to be fair. Not every Republican is cheering this on. On the filibuster, Speaker Mike Johnson did say something halfway decent, actually warned that it's an important safeguard, the filibuster is, and explicitly said that Republicans wouldn't like it if the shoe were on the other foot. Well, that's the right instinct. But too often, the broader GOP posture is reactive. Well, if they're going to do it, maybe we should do it too. I disagree. I believe that's how institutions die. You don't preserve a republic by copying the worst instincts of your opponents before they get the chance. When your strategy becomes beat them at being lawless, congratulations, you're already losing. And this is where I think the contrast matters. We can look down the state of Florida on property taxes. Governor Ron DeSantis pushing for a constitutional change through the legislative process and voter-approved amendment route, not just executive action. Florida lawmakers, a mixed bag though they may be, move bills and joint resolutions, and even the coverage of this push notes DeSantis saying it's better to do it right than to do it quick because voters have to weigh in. And that's not as sexy as a Truth Social post. It doesn't trend as hard. It doesn't get clipped into a 12-second reel, but it lasts. And that's what I want from Republicans, not viral wins, durable wins. And I didn't hear a plan for durable wins. I heard the term winning. We're winning so much. We're winning so much for now. It's one thing if you're in a best-of-7 series to go up 2-0. Feels pretty good, but you still got to win 2 more games. And if you're like my Seattle Mariners, you realize that it's a little bit harder than you think it might be. But I digress. I don't want a GOP that governs by name and an emergency declaration while Congress stands there like a decorative houseplant, clapping like a trained seal, standing up, sitting down on cue. I want a party that still remembers what Article 1 is for. I want a party that can take yes for an answer from the Constitution. I want a party that understands the office of the president has enough power and we don't need to keep funneling more into it. Now, I know this is faith focused. Where's the scripture come in? Well, it comes in right here. Because the Bible, God tells us that he doesn't just care what rulers do, he cares how rulers govern. Proverbs 11 and verse 1 says, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. A just weight is his delight. In other words, governing by selective rules and elastic standards is a false balance. Proverbs 16:12 gives us the principle that righteous government isn't built on political expediency. Ecclesiastes 5 and Matthew 5 both emphasize keeping your word. If you're going to campaign on accountability and constitutional order and transparency, then govern that way. Exodus 18 calls for leaders who are able, trustworthy, and hate dishonest gain. That doesn't sound like backroom deal making with big pharma and big tech. In fact, those two industries were two of the industries we wanted held accountable in a Trump 2.0, not getting into bed with them. Isaiah chapter 1 condemns rulers who love bribes and who chase rewards instead of justice. Now, certainly for Christians, but I want to say conservatives as well, we should not become cheerleaders for power at the expense of principle, especially because it's our guy. But here's what keeps me up at night. Everything Trump does by executive order can be undone. Everything he does by emergency power can be replicated. Every precedent he sets can be weaponized. So what exactly is the long-term legacy if Congress keeps getting boxed out? Well, you get more concentrated power, more brittle policy, more whiplash at every election, more government by degree. And eventually, if we keep going down this road, less republic, more ruler. That is not what the founders built, and it's not what conservatives are supposed to conserve. If we keep surrendering self-government because our guy is in the office, because our guy is strong enough or has the stones to just do it, one day we're going to wake up and realize We didn't lose the republic in one coup or one election. We traded it away, one temporary shortcut at a time. And the worst part, we will have helped build the machine that those who are sitting down instead of standing up for protecting Americans will have helped build the machine that they used to crush us. I don't want to bring in my friends, R.C. Williams. Juliana Ormond, welcome in for comment here, friends. How do we avoid becoming partisan cheerleaders when our side gains power? Is there not a biblical case, or even just a moral case, although morality comes from the Bible, but just a basic social case for the integrity of the process, not just policy outcomes?
Andrew, I got to say, it's blaring to me that the Constitution was designed based on biblical principles for this exact reason. I also have to say, in more comedic fashion, is that when President Trump came out and he was doing his thing, the song that popped in my head was Party Man from Prince back in the Batman movie in 1989. That I just said they should have just played it as his intro music because it was the golden age and a party and everything else. But Andrew, you're absolutely right. And this show, once again, a year and a half, 2 years ago, was spot on. If you govern this way, inevitably everything that you ever wanted to do is going to get unwound on January 20th, 2029. It's game over, right? You can't do this. You've got to codify all of these things into law. And unfortunately, it was a very long-winded speech in the sense that it just kept going on and on and on. But as you said, no tangible moves. And by the way, Andrew, that's also not biblical, right? Say what you need to say. Let your yes be a yes and let your no be a no. The other thing that pops up for me is Ezekiel 33:2. That is the verse that reminds us that leaders are held to a significantly higher standard because they're responsible for Father's people.
I think that we've been taught that, it's Republican versus Democrat, when in reality, it's them versus kingdom. Kingdom needs to come first, right? The Republican Party in August of 2024 is no longer pro-life. They are pro-choice. Well, that's no longer kingdom. So at what point does the church stand up and say, this is a party that obviously is not, representing our interests? We're seeing what it is that they're doing, and we're saying, no, we want kingdom because that's the only truth that we have. That's the only foundation that we really have.
What do you think is going to be the enduring legacy of this moment, of this era, if most of our wins come by executive action that can be reversed? And again, we have to keep reminding everybody, we are for America. I want Trump to succeed. To say that I want Donald Trump to fail is like, well, I'm in a plane and I want the pilot to fail. That's stupid. But we're setting up a precedent and allowing behaviors from our leaders that pretty soon our voices are going to be completely boxed out. That's my concern. So what endures if we continue down this executive action road?
Oof. I want to say that Bill Federer says one of the ways that our government is able to play with everything is because they keep adding and bastardizing things to manipulate the laws and everything to their agenda. Instead of going back to the basics, which is what our forefathers gave us, shall not infringe does not mean that you can start telling us what we're going to be doing with our arms. There's a reason why it's called arms, okay? So now we as the people need to say our expectation of what we want you to do is to go back to the original and do what we're supposed to be doing as per our founding fathers, because this chicanery that's going on, we're watching it and we can see that they're in cahoots with each other.
Andrew, I think the other thing that's dangerous here, Juliana and I talked about this earlier today, is that father is a father of order.
That's right.
And biblically speaking, we are given very strict rules as leaders within the kingdom on how we should do things. Those include patience, temperance, focus, and modeling. And Andrew, I got to be honest with you, the things that we saw last night, the things that we've seen, and we agree with you. We don't want President Trump to fail, because if he fails, we all fail. But we also have to be willing to be critical in these times. Nothing that I saw last night from him or anybody else gave me any assurance that biblically speaking, we're doing all the things that Father had called on us to do when we're leading people, or in this case, leading a nation. That legacy becomes incredibly dangerous, Andrew. I think 20, 30 years from now, people look back at it and say, man, they were sure in a hurry for no good reason other than vanity points or social media posts, and nothing got done.
What should we be demanding of our GOP leaders right now? And we can go state if you like, but at the federal level, I realize we think that the feds are lost and DC is lost, and maybe it is, it's corrupt from within, but we still have representatives that we're voting for, hopefully thinking about. What should we be demanding from our leaders if we want, our leaders don't want it, but if we want real lasting reform?
Andrew, wow. So selfishly, I think biblically, I would ask all of them to go back and reread the Bible and really focus on the chapters and verses around leadership and what is required. You don't just get the vanity. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And also more practically, Andrew, I would pray that they actually spent time reading the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Federalist Papers and take a step back and understand what it means to govern. I mean, I learned this in junior high school and high school, Andrew. Our form of governance in a constitutional republic is designed to drive you absolutely crazy. You should argue, you should bicker, you should go back and forth, because at the end of the day, whatever you put forward should be tried, true, and tested, and in line with the rights that are designed to protect the people of this country. That is how you get good governance. You don't get it rushing in like a bull in a china shop. You get it with patience and actually following the rules that we've been given.